Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News Extra, broadcasting live from the Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. President Trump hints at progress on the US-backed peace plan to end the Russia-Ukraine war following talks in Geneva over the weekend. Israel kills a top Hezbollah commander during a strike on Beirut, despite a US brokered ceasefire being in place. And Milan prosecutors probe sniper tourists during the 90s Sarajevo siege, following explosive allegations against the Serbian president. Now, President Trump has hinted that progress has potentially been made on the US-backed peace plan to end the Russia-Ukraine war. He said something big may be happening following talks between the US and Ukraine in Geneva this weekend. Meanwhile, President Zelenskyy has said giving Ukrainian territory to Russia is the main problem. To discuss this and all of today's stories, I'm joined by Al Arabiya senior presenter Rawia Alami, who's right here in the studio next to me, and writer and broadcaster Esther, who joins us all the way from Florida. Welcome, Esther and Rawia. Great to have you on the show. Rawia, let's start with you. So it's been a weekend of diplomacy. We've seen that happening. Everyone's been meeting in Geneva. There's been so much mixed messaging going on here. It's difficult to cut through the noise, but the US seems positive about the plan. Meanwhile, Ukraine doesn't seem so convinced. We've also heard from Russia, a lot happening.
Absolutely. Mixed messages indeed, and mixed reactions also to the US-Russian peace plan, as they're calling it. I think there are many reasons for that. One of them is because with all the parties involved, whether it be US, Ukraine, or Russia, there's a huge difference in motivation and in priorities, for example. The US appears to be eager to get a fast deal regardless of the concessions. Ukraine obviously wants full sovereignty, it wants strong security guarantees, freedom to align with the West, and also no territorial concessions. Russia, on the other hand, it wants territorial recognition, it wants a neutral or a weakened Ukraine. It also wants, very limited or reduced US or NATO influence, and it wants a narrative victory as well. So this is one reason. Another reason is domestic pressure in all of those countries. In the US, politicians are divided. Some of them, they support the plan. Others, they think that it is a reward for Russian aggression. It's very favored to Russia. In Ukraine, Zelenskyy is facing a lot of pressure internally to not accept any deal that carries any concessions, land concessions, or even security concessions on security or sovereignty. And in Russia, apparently leaders feel that they need to demonstrate strength while keeping the door for the negotiations open. Another reason, I think, is deep mistrust from Ukraine towards Russia, and most importantly, also, there has been poor communication and a lot of leaks. Now, we have to remember that the details of this US proposal started to surface before all parties were consulted. In fact, Ukraine was not involved in the drafting of this proposal, and European allies were completely sidelined, and were not involved in this proposal. And finally, also, Russia has been deliberately sending vague messages. It signals positiveness and openness 1 second or, one day, and then the next, it kind of signals caution or, they're not really on board as initially thought.
Some would argue that that was Russia's typical playbook.
It is.
Rawia, but thank you so much. And Esther, let's come to you because we have seen Zelenskyy really under pressure here. He's in a difficult position, but he's continued to refuse giving up territory to Russia. This has always been the red line when it comes to Ukraine. We have been talking about territory now for a year since Donald Trump got into the White House and tried to end this war. Do you know, without giving up territory, is Ukraine just going to be in this forever war? Do they need to make some sort of concession?
Well, right now, the concession isn't so much something that's part like a military reality. So giving up territory, for example, the military situation on the ground has basically calcified. Occasionally, you might see territorial boundaries move a kilometer here and there. But really, both sides have dug in. And what becomes the territorial integrity is basically which side has which troops that basically control that area. And so the question isn't what you want, it's what are you willing to do to get it. And so we're now entering this space of what it seems like is going to be managed ambiguity, in the sense that the Europeans would obviously like a Ukraine that comes out of this with strong security guarantees from the US and from Europe, a real repellent for Russia so that they don't continue this or continue into other neighboring territories. And it looks like what they're willing to do to get it is some sort of coalition of the willing, which I can assure you now will not amount to much, and really kind of just winning the linguistic battle. And for the US, I think this is the longer this goes on, the less and less this becomes important for the Trump administration, not because they don't care about Ukraine, but because Trump is facing some pushback here at home about the success of his own domestic agenda. So really the only winners for maintaining the status quo are the Russians. And you can see that in a lot of the kind of the media that's coming out of Russia via the newspapers and state broadcasters. While there is a fair bit of sort of plurality amongst media outlets in Russia, there are obviously red lines that they cannot cross, and that's dictated by the Kremlin. Once you start hearing all their major outlets saying the same thing, like, we don't want to accept a ceasefire, which will allow the Ukrainians to regroup without any real concessions towards us, Russia, and the success of this special military operation, which is what they're calling it in Russia, then we're not interested. So at the moment, the Kremlin has been very vocal in the sense that they're willing and perfectly happy to keep this war going because it just calcifies and entrenches their position. And at the end of the day, the biggest losers are, of course, the Ukrainians that are facing severe infrastructure hits, particularly towards energy infrastructure. I mean, the latest reports is that Ukrainians log into an app and see how many, what their allotted 3 hours of electricity morning, afternoon, and evening is going to be. That's no way to live. So at some point, there has to be the cost of saying no has to be a lot more than what they're actually losing on the ground. What I suspect is going to happen is this kind of space of managed ambiguity, which is clearly no red lines will be crossed, and those red lines will be agreed by the Americans, by the Europeans, by the Russians. I think in all but name, the territories that have been taken by the Russians will function as, if nothing else, some sort of vassal state of Russia. I don't think they're going to get what they want by Russia being an official language, because I think that's an insult and a step too far. But unfortunately, the Ukrainians are just going to have to settle with some sort of linguistics battle, which is who can say that they technically own the territory, but in practice, it will remain in the hands of whichever military has managed to keep it up until this point.
The difficult part is the more this diplomacy goes on and these arguments go on, more and more people are losing their lives. There's been huge loss of young men and all men in this war. They say that Russia may have lost in the region of 1 million men, and that is a huge amount. And I know, Esther, we talk about Russia keep fighting is what they're possibly going to do, but they're also being crippled by sanctions. And I don't know, Rawia, you first and then Esther. I don't even think Russia is able to keep on this war footing for much longer. There's got to come a time where everyone's got to come to the table and say, okay.
That is definitely logical. I mean, nobody can withstand the costs of war for years on end, basically. But if you take, I think, you look at Ukraine in comparison to Russia, especially even with the support of the West, which doesn't seem to be as it was promised, at least at this stage. I think Russia has more of a chance to withstand those costs of the war. But in whichever case, I don't think this can be sustainable for years on end or more years to come. So, I mean, this is a start, let's say, about this deal. Amendments apparently have been made to the plan in Geneva during the negotiations. And even though, the White House has quoted the Ukrainians saying that now with the amendments, the plan addresses their national security concerns a lot more. Even the White House in a statement said that the Europeans also seem to be happier with the plan now, not just the Ukrainians. But then you have the problem of, okay, are the Russians, does it work for the Russians with the amendments, the plan, would it be acceptable? It doesn't seem to be. So even though it's a start, at least there are negotiations, there are points that they're negotiating. It's a good start, yet I think it's very hard to predict whether it's going to turn into something material or not.
Final thought from you, Esther. By Thanksgiving, do you think that we'll see any sort of signature, any deal at all? Thursday's Thanksgiving, of course.
Yes, I think the Russians are going to get on the ground. They're going to get their way. But I think in terms of sort of the PR battle, I think the Ukrainians and the Europeans are going to insist that the language remains loose enough that they can still save face and that you don't have a complete collapse of the Ukrainian political system. And unfortunately, that's what most people are going to have to settle with right now, because I don't think any side is really willing to put in the blood, sweat and tears that it requires to meaningfully shift the narrative on this. And you have to remember that even though Russia obviously can't keep this going indefinitely, they have partners and allies in this war that don't play by conventional rules of law. They're happy to use North Korean soldiers, for example, and send them into this meat grinder to meet their objectives. That's a completely different type of enemy that you're describing. And unfortunately, the Europeans and Ukrainians need to come to terms with the fact that they're the ones that are going to be losing more by perpetuating this.
Thank you so much for your thoughts on that. Stay right there as we move on now to another story. Israel has killed a senior Hezbollah commander in a rare strike on Beirut's southern suburbs, despite a US and French brokered ceasefire. Hezbollah confirmed that the death of its second-in-command actually happened, calling it the attack a red line, while Lebanon says at least 5 people were killed and dozens were wounded. Esther, this happened over the weekend. The Israeli strikes on Lebanon are nothing new. We have seen them before, if anything, ramping up of late. But striking the capitals is quite significant, isn't it?
It is, and a few months ago, particularly in the wake of the Israeli strike on Doha that failed to take out the senior Hamas officials that they were targeting, this would have been completely unacceptable. But really, what we're seeing and what's actually happening on the ground have diverged so much that, again, we go back to the sort of managed ambiguity, which is all interested parties have their red lines that are not going to be crossed, and that's entrenched, and particularly how the media is approaching it. So, the neighboring Arab leaders have their red lines for Israel that they're not going to allow to cross, especially in the wake of what happened in Doha. The Americans certainly at the top of this are managing the situation and also have their own red lines for both sides that they're not allowing to cross over a certain line. And certainly Hamas and Israel and the Israel's enemies in the region also have their own red lines. So what we're seeing now is not necessarily a ceasefire, and what a ceasefire actually means, which is a stopping of all hostilities. You're seeing more surgical, smaller skirmishes and attacks that are not enough of a PR disaster to sort of raise the ire of all the parties that are interested, but it's still kind of a continuation of hostility. So I'll give you an example. New Hamas tunnels were discovered in East Rafah over the weekend, and the IDF shot 5 or executed or killed 5 Hamas officials that dared to put their heads above the parapet and come up from these tunnels that were 20 meters underground. Now, that's not a ceasefire in the traditional sense of things because you're supposed to stop all hostilities. But in the same way, Hamas has also been firing artillery against Israel, all throughout this sort of ceasefire. They've had delays in returning the bodies of the hostages, even though that was one of the conditions for this ceasefire. So you're kind of seeing this blurring of the lines and these drawing of informal rules that allows all parties to kind of tolerate the status quo without leading to an outright sort of break in engagement from either party. And that's the same thing that's happening with Hezbollah. You know, this attack in Beirut traditionally would have received the ire of the international community in a way that, you know, countries like the UAE, Saudi Arabia and all of that would just completely disengage with Israel. But because we're now operating in this gray space where the formal hostilities have died down enough for it to be tolerable for all parties to kind of continue some sort of talks or diplomatic relations, then this is what's going to happen. And I suspect this is probably going to be the status quo until some form of more permanent agreement can be agreed upon. And it's quite an uncomfortable place to be because obviously we don't know what these formal red lines are, but the people behind the negotiating table, the people that know the kind of PR fallout from any outright hostilities are the ones drawing the rules. And so at the moment, this war, which is still what it is just evolving in a way that's not showing the kind of carnage that we've been seeing for the last 2 years.
And Esther, Esther, thank you so much. Rawia, I was just thinking about this because, you know, this is Hezbollah's chief of staff. This is second in command to Hezbollah. They have been weakened significantly over the last few years. And is there likely to be any retaliation at all from Hezbollah? Because I must admit, as of late, they've been pretty quiet.
They have, because as you said, they have been majorly weakened. But this assassination of al-Tabtabai is a big, hard blow for Hezbollah. When they announced his martyrism, as they call it, they hailed him as the greatest jihadist commander that has faced what they described as the Israeli enemy till the last breath. So he is very significant, especially after Hezbollah has lost most of its top commanders, if not all. I think we might see a response, but I highly doubt it's going to be a big retaliation. It will probably be a measured response, probably even delayed. We won't see anything now. Also, sources close to Hezbollah have been saying that apparently there are two opinions, or there's a conflict inside the group. There are two opinions. There are those who want to send a signal and a response for this assassination, and there are those who believe that it is not the right time and the group should refrain from responding to the assassination. We should not forget that, as you said, Hezbollah has been very, very weakened in the past couple of years, especially in the summer of 2024 after the Israeli bombings and Israel targeted the top tier,
the pages that was
after the pagers, and then targeting the same area that was targeted, Har Tahrik, inside the southern suburb of Beirut, which is the stronghold of Hezbollah there. And that's at the time when Nasrallah was killed and so many other commanders. And now, they've lost almost all high-ranking commanders. They also lost their supply routes from Syria after the ousting of the Assad's regime. And I think Hezbollah knows very well that at this stage, if they retaliate, Israel is going to hit, and they're going to hit hard. I don't think Israel is going to stop targeting who they believe are, Hezbollah operatives or terrorists in southern Lebanon or all over Lebanon. I'm not sure that it's going to develop into another war or, a big-scale military confrontation, given the state of Hezbollah militarily right now.
And it's interesting because I was speaking to somebody earlier who said an escalation from Israel could
yes.
well happen within Lebanon. And that's because Hezbollah has not agreed to the ceasefire when it comes to disarming, to not rearming, and the Lebanese government hasn't been doing enough to implement that. So it's a really tricky, difficult situation in Lebanon at the moment. Thank you for your thoughts on that. Let's move on to another story now. And prosecutors in Italy are stepping up their probe into foreigners who allegedly paid to shoot civilians during the Sarajevo siege. The case now includes accusations against Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić. Italian and other nationals are also under investigation as new evidence comes to light. Rawia, let's talk to you about this first of all. This story is deeply disturbing.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure Esther would agree with how distressing this is. And this all happened in the Bosnia-Serb war, and that was in the 90s. Why are we hearing about these allegations now, so many years on? It's 2025.
Absolutely. I mean, it's horrifying. It sounds, when you read the details of it, or even watch the documentary, Sarajevo Safari, you would feel that you're watching a scene from, as Esther said, from Squid Games or from the Hunger Games. It's that unreal almost. Having said that, I mean, the renewed attention is not really because the international authorities decided to have a look at this and decided to deem what they were sort of describing as rumors all of those years. We're talking about almost 3 decades, more than 3 decades actually, that it's just a rumor. It's basically the hard work of a journalist who spent years investigating these rumors until he managed to prove that they were right, and also the hard work of a filmmaker, the one who made the documentary I've just mentioned, Sarajevo Safari, which actually pushed this entire issue into the global spotlight, and at the same time gave it like a visual reality or a visual dimension. Apparently, the journalist Ezio Gavazzini has submitted a detailed 17-page complaint to the prosecutors of Milan. It is very well documented. He spent years collecting eyewitnesses and eyewitness testimonies and also evidence. And also we have to bear in mind that the law in Italy, the legal system, is actually facilitates such a case, because apparently the charge of murder aggravated by cruelty doesn't have a statute of limitation, which means that they can still hold people accountable.
Even all these years
after
on.
30 or even 50 years, which is great.
And Esther, the former Sarajevo mayor has also provided a report into these horrific incidents. What are we likely to see happen to those alleged sniper tourists? I think this is the big question. Will anybody actually see jail time?
Well, I think at the level, at this current stage, it's quite ambiguous. But it's really interesting to see who kind of, the kinds of people that are being implicated in this sort of death tourism. And it ranges from sort of Italians to Germans to French citizens to English citizens. So it's quite an international kind of tourism scheme, as horrific as it sounds. And I think just in terms of the geography of this war, so Sarajevo sits within a basin and it's surrounded by mountains. So during this war, what you had is the city was very easy to isolate because you basically had troops around in the surrounding mountains just picking off individuals. And one of the most sort of telling images from this conflict was on a bridge which became known as sort of the sniper hot point in the city, hot point in the city, because it was the only bridge that led to the airport in the city, and people had to travel by it because it was basically such an important piece of infrastructure. And there was an image that came during the war of a couple that had been shot dead by sniper rifle during this conflict. And their bodies lay on the bridge for, I think, up to 4 days because they were technically in no man's land. And this is kind of this whole stunning iconography of it. And this is something that Sarajevo Safaris, the documentary, brought up back in 2022, which kind of brought this whole horror back into international imagination. So what we're going to see is clearly there is obviously obviously substantial evidence. There have been testimonies from fighters on the Bosnian side that have testified towards this, and huge transfers of cash payments by these tourists that were basically willing to treat human beings like animals for their own sadistic game. But what I suspect is going to happen is this is probably going to be elevated to the ICC. Obviously, that Serbian general who was convicted of genocide and crimes against humanity a few years ago kind of paved the way, because once you can establish there is an individual at the top of this who was convicted of such heinous crimes, then it's not outside the realm of possibility that something like this would happen, because obviously he didn't act alone. So at the moment, we're waiting for the prosecutors to gather all the evidence and identify the individuals that have been accused of this, either send extradition requests or elevate this to the level of the ICC, where it would be uncomfortable for states to refuse to extradite their own citizens who have been implicated in this. But it's just such a horrific thing to even consider, the fact that something like this could have happened in the 90s, where you had militaries that were basically acting in such a rogue state that could have facilitated such a horrific act of violence and brutality for what looks like significant sums of money.
And the sad thing about it is it's taken years and years, and for these journalists to fight for justice for these people. So also credit to them.
Of course.
We speak about the Sarajevo safari. We also speak about this Italian journalist who has gathered this evidence himself, and he's desperate to get justice for those people. But Rawia, like Esther said, it was the people involved in this. It was wealthy men, if you want to believe the allegations.
Absolutely. Wealthy men, not just from Italy, not men, I mean, wealthy people. I don't know if there were women involved, but I mean, wealthy people, not just from Italy, but from all across the world. They paid big amounts of money to be able to do this. And they would fly and then, to the closest area, and then they would be escorted by these soldiers to the mountains of Sarajevo, so that they can literally, they're treating it as if it's a video game,
Like Esther
chasing
did say,
people, exactly.
It's almost the Squid Games in real life. It's pretty horrendous.
Terrible.
But thank you so much for your thoughts. Stay right there as we move on to another story now. And London could introduce a new tourist tax on visitors staying overnight in the UK's capital, following the example of other cities like Paris, New York, and also Tokyo. The UK's Chancellor Rachel Reeves is expected to give London's mayor the authority to impose a levy, which could raise up to £240 million a year. Okay, Esther, let's get into this. You lived and you worked in London exactly like I did. Is this a good idea to raise capital in the capital, basically?
Well, the argument from the likes of the mayor and other cities that are eyeing up this tax with dollar signs in their eyes or pound signs in their eyes is that England is the only country in the G7 that doesn't levy a tourist tax. But they also conveniently forget that it's actually very expensive to be a tourist in England and in places like London. The argument that this is going to help repair some of the wear and tear that is inevitably done by tourists doesn't take into account certain realities, one of which is the fact that the hospitality industry in the UK has been battered relentlessly from years of these strikes, from the increase in national insurance on employers, which has made it more difficult to hire full-time staff. So you have people that are sort of a double whammy of insecure employment in the hospitality industry, but also employers within the hospitality industry finding it difficult to recruit because they just can't afford it. Now you're going to add this tax, which we don't know if it's going to be a progressive tax or if it's a flat fee, which is some of the things that some of the ways that these taxes manifest themselves in other countries like Spain and Croatia, for example. But the overarching point is it's not in the hospitality industry's best interest to make tourism less attractive by making it more expensive, but also it doesn't go to solve the problem of mismanagement in London. It's not going to make tourists any safer. There are many tourists in London and many people who live in London in general who cannot walk around with their phones out, for example, because it's going to get snatched, and you can trust and believe that once it gets snatched, it's never going to get back. You have an increase in antisocial behavior and just general dirtiness in public spaces that obviously all of this money is not going to go to addressing, because even other forms of taxes that don't affect tourists, like the increase in congestion charge, which people like myself have to pay, it's gone up from 15 to 18 pounds. We haven't seen a change in this at all from all the kind of extra revenue that the City of London is raking in. I also think outside of London, you're going to make it a very hard case to make cities like Birmingham more attractive to tourists by making it more expensive. It's not a very attractive place to visit in the first place, and without making it more expensive as well. So while I understand the argument that, this is a way of raising money without it being sort of a step outside of what other countries are doing because it's particularly common, I think you also have to think of what people, not just residents, but also tourists and the hospitality industry are getting in exchange for this. And it's probably nothing. And it's just a huge money grab that the state is facilitating, which is going to make the UK, in my opinion, a less desirable place both to live in and to visit.
And it's so interesting because, Esther, I would echo that. I lived in London, extremely expensive to visit. It's dirty. There's a crime problem. Sadiq Khan, the mayor, has been heavily criticised on all fronts. And also, it's a sad place right now for the cost of living crisis. We've got an upcoming budget. The hospitality sector is extremely concerned about the budget. They don't know if they'll get anything in that budget that could possibly help them. It's just been sort of chaos after chaos. Really, since COVID, Rawia, hospitality hasn't actually recovered. But you visited London recently. Do you think the city should tax people? Are they going to benefit from it? Would you go back if there was a tax?
Well, the thing is, I'm in a different position. First of all, I have a son who studies in London, so I'm going to be going back and forth.
Hi, Rawia's son.
Regardless, regardless of the tourist tax or not. And I can see that both your point of view comes from a national, I mean, you're both British nationals, if I'm not mistaken, also Esther is. I have a tourist perspective. Right? I visited London in September. I hadn't been to London for almost 12 or 13 years prior to that, even though I lived in London for a while when I was a student, I never worked there. I saw a huge difference in the city. Honestly, the cleanliness that Esther was talking about, I was surprised and shocked to see garbage bags still on the street, on the same street that I walked for 2-3 days, are still there. And then when I came back, you were telling me that obviously they collect them once a week. I saw Britain in general, but London specifically very different from what I remember in the golden days, let's see, when I used to go there. Having said that, you walk on the streets of London, you would hear other languages way more than you would hear English. And these people, it's obvious, you can tell that they're tourists. I don't think, forcing a tourist levy or a tourist tax on tourists is gonna really affect that much the tourist influx coming into London. It is one of the most attractive, touristic areas or cities to go. I think that it will always have tourists. Now, okay, even if it does not affect the number of tourists coming in, I don't know if it's going to be beneficial for the city or not. As you said, that's something maybe you would know more about. But in whichever case, I don't think, even if it is, there's the tourist tax, I don't think it's going to affect. It's not. I
think just to take it out, just to blow it up a little bit as well. London is a historical sort of artifact, and it's always going to have tourists. It's still a global city, and it's very important. It's a very important financial center, not just for the country, but for the world more broadly. But when you zoom out and you look at cities like Bristol or Manchester or Birmingham or Edinburgh, which I love, or Glasgow, which I love a bit less, then you kind of have a harder argument to make because, yes, London does suck up a lot of the economic energy in the UK, but with the economy basically trotting around of 0.1% growth year after year, which is basically non-existent or anemic growth at best. I think things like this just make it that much harder. You're already battering an industry that is the first to take a hit when there's a new budget that calls for tax rises, particularly on employers. Hospitality and kind of just entertainment in general is one of the first things that goes when households are reevaluating their budget and realizing what they can splash on. People would rather spend money on food than hospitality. It's just obvious. And I think that's one of the things that really gets mixed up in this conversation. It's just London is just one part of it. London is also a commuter city. London is also, if you want to travel in Europe more broadly, a lot of people from places like the US, for example, start in London and then go to places like, Paris or Prague or Budapest or all of that. So there's that to factor in. And of course, that won't necessarily get affected if you're staying in a Marriott hotel near Heathrow. But it's the country more broadly that we have to consider. There's so many gems around the country that are already difficult and finding it hard to soak up any of those tourism dollars. And this is just one of the things that make it more difficult. I know in the case of London, it's just going to go down the funnel, the black hole of Sadiq Khan's mismanagement. But I think in cities like Birmingham and Bristol and Manchester and all of these places, we really have to consider whether it's actually going to do more harm than good by just discouraging local tourists, which make up the bulk of tourism in lesser known places and parts of the UK.
I think if I may just add one thing, I think it's also gonna depend on how greedy the London municipality is, because if they apparently
they're greedy, Rawia.
They are greedy,
yes.
Because if they charge just £1, basically £1 per night, and it's a set amount,
yes,
they are going to raise 91 million per year. But if they do it as a percentage, then yes, that's going to be substantial. It's going to raise them a lot more money, up to £240 million, but it's going to be substantial from, a substantial percentage.
But like Esther did say a little bit earlier, we've got to wrap this up now, but like Esther did say earlier, it's the mismanagement that's happening in London now. So even the money that they're doing for congestion charge, for ULEZ, they're paying everyone to do everything in London, and it's still not any better.
And they're not doing much.
Yeah. Well, let's put it politely. That's exactly it. Now, it's that time of the show where Rawia and Esther have chosen two of the quirkiest stories of the day. I don't know if these stories are quirky.
I don't think so.
Or if they're just disturbing.
Horrifying stories.
Yes. Let's start with yours, Rawia. And it's about a bear that followed a little boy, he was only 11, into a shop in Pennsylvania.
Yes, absolutely. Well, there's this 11-year-old boy who was waiting for his father outside a dollar store shop in Pennsylvania, just waiting. And then he says, because they interviewed him, and he describes the situation, that he just looks across the road and there's this black bear who was coming towards him. So the boy describes his thought process, that he was thinking, oh my God, I'm going to be eaten by a black bear just now. So he turns around and he runs inside the dollar store, but the bear obviously follows him. So him, the boy, and the cashier end up on top of the counter, trying to basically avoid being attacked by this bear. The bear comes in, and then for some reason they manage to escape. They manage to grab their things and just run out of the store, leaving the bear inside, who actually climbed, as you can see in the footage, on top of the same counter the boy and the cashier were on, but then just wandered around in the store and left on his own.
Not to sound trivial, but Esther, we're looking at the pictures there, and to me it looked like the bear just wanted some cigarettes from behind the counter and a little bit of chewing gum.
I think what's happening, the bears are becoming pigeons of the Midwest.
Yeah.
Yes.
In that, they're becoming increasingly socialized around human beings. And he may not have been looking at that little boy as food, but I think he might have clocked that the little boy can direct him towards food, like Cheetos or something.
Yeah.
And so you're seeing these bears that are increasingly comfortable around human and human activity, and they're figuring out that they can get food in certain areas
usually
by just making themselves closer to humans.
My sister lives in Los Angeles in a woody, sort of foresty area, and they get bears all the time, but they only get them in the summer when it gets really, really hot. You'd find the mother bear with her cubs coming down the mountain, searching for food, basically, or water.
Yeah.
You would find them swimming in people's swimming pools, outside. So it is quite unusual in November in Pennsylvania, which is quite cold, for a bear to be wandering around away from its, natural habitat.
Maybe like Esther
But as you said, yes, they have been socialized.
looking for Cheetos.
Socially trained.
Looking for Cheetos in the dollar store. And Esther, let's move on to yours now, because this, we talked about it before we came on air. I think everyone in the world will agree this is the most terrifying thing ever. Yours is about a Thai woman who was found alive in a coffin.
Just before she was about to be cremated and turned into human ash. So what led to this was apparently her brother found her lifeless body in her home and decided to take her to a funeral home, put her in a coffin, and then get her cremated 2 days later. Now, I think there must have been some sort of family spat here or some sort of disagreement, because I don't understand why he wouldn't at least ascertain a medical certificate that would say that she was actually dead. And this is kind of my worst nightmare, to wake up confined in a box. And her timing was impeccable, because if she'd waited a few moments longer, she wouldn't have been alive to tell the tale. But she just before she was about to be cremated, she woke up and emerged from this coffin. I'm sure to the horrified faces of the people that work there. And it's just one of those stories that you just can't make up, because other than the fact that I don't think this is as innocent on the part of the brother as he says, what are the chances that someone is not only found alive in a coffin, but all the kind of procedures that you go through to make sure that someone's actually dead are skipped? And it kind of reminds me of a story of an old lady who didn't have a do not resuscitate order on her medical files, and so every time she kind of coded on the bed, she was resuscitated by having a jolt of electricity shot through her, and she actually woke up. So you'd have her family members around her, you know, getting emotionally ready to mourn the loss of their loved one, and they all gathered around and they're like, clear, and then she wakes up and she actually is alive again. And it's just, it happened about 3 times, and they just thought, enough, something needs to be done here.
Maybe they've just had enough
for the death of your loved one, and then it's being a false alarm.
Can I tell you what's really interesting? Have you ever heard the saying dead ringer?
You were telling us, yeah.
He's a dead ringer.
No.
Okay, well, there's a saying that...
Well, I've heard the saying.
Yeah, dead ringer. But you know where it comes from? In the Victorian times, it was actually quite common to be buried alive. And they found it was actually a big problem. One, because they didn't have the medical. We have now, obviously, Esther and Rawia. So what they used to do is they used to bury people, but connect a string to their finger and a bell that used to come out of the grave. And someone used to work the graveyard, and if they woke up, they would move their fingers and ring the bell, and then they would dig them back out again.
Imagine the
so that's
horror.
so that's why, you know, if someone sees you and they're like, oh, Rawia, you're a dead ringer. You look exactly like that person. That's where that saying comes from. Dead ringer.
Oh my God. Yeah. But that's horror. I mean, imagine the horror of a person who wakes up inside a coffin, and then, you know, the time they have to wait.
I feel like
at the
I'm
time, by
laughing
the time
because
somebody
it's so
hears
bad.
the ring, the ringing of the bell and comes and digs them out.
Yeah.
Oh my God, it's terrible. It's terrifying.
Well, we all got through this show alive.
Oh, thank God.
Yes, and hopefully we'll see you again. Thanks.
No dead ringers.
No dead ringers here. Yeah. Thanks to tonight's guest, Arabiya senior presenter Rawia Alami, who was with me, of course, in the studio, and writer and broadcaster Esther Krakue. And she joined us all the way from Florida. And that's all from us on W News Extra. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Of course, follow us on X. G&T will be coming up next with Tom Burgess-Watson. Goodbye and thank you.